Welcome, protagonists. My name is Codiferrous, and today I'm bringing you Cuphead all main story bosses ranked from easiest to hardest. When this game originally released, I was so excited for it that I actually called the day off from teaching to play it. Cuphead is a game made by Studio MDHR, whose art style was inspired by old-fashioned cartoons with the core gameplay built on retro 20th century games. Each animation of Cuphead was drawn by hand, and given how less commonplace it is to do this, the tedium of undertaking such direction actually resulted in the delay of the game as well as its DLC. And keeping in line with retro aspects, the game itself is a 2D boss rush shooter. The game also contains side-scrolling platform levels formerly known as run-and-guns. These stages serve as a way for the player to collect gold coins to use as currency in acquiring additional upgrades and weapons. These upgrades and weapons are meant to supply you with a better means to deal with the main attraction here: the various bosses. Important to note is the existence of a counter system known as parrying. By pressing the jump button at the proper time on bright pink objects and projectiles, we can block them and fill up our power meter. Said power meter allows you to fire off an empowered missile that changes depending on your weapon, and having a full meter allows you to perform your super. Aside from the game mechanics, there is a general story to play out here, but it's not what I would call an elaborate RPG by any stretch of the imagination. But we know the story isn't something that you actually care for. We all know why you play this game. We know that when you purchased this accursed title, you freely signed your right to enjoyment, because there would only ever be two reasons that you would get this, and that is to torture your psyche and exercise your amygdala, because this game is excruciatingly difficult. Each boss has been expertly crafted to have multiple phases with varying attack patterns. The safe zones are constantly changing and being removed, while the aggression and predictability of the boss's attacks remain an enigma. With only 3 hearts to run off of, you will usually clear these fights with only a single heart remaining. That is, if you can clear them at all. Be prepared to die. A lot. There is no room for forgiveness in making mistakes, because the deal is, for being so difficult, it is not due to poor game design or goofy mechanics. I have praised and cited Cuphead's difficulty in my other videos due to it being entirely organic in its progression and challenge, as well as sharpening the player's skill in overcoming each level before them. You really feel like each defeat is through your own lack of skill and knowledge, with the player's adaptability ultimately shining through. This fine line of challenge and broken game mechanics is something that Cuphead expertly tap dances on. Now, to wrap up this introduction, I gotta highlight some key points. This video is entirely my own opinion. Everyone's experience with the game is going to be unique, so your list is likely to be different than mine, and that's okay. Next, the following footage that you're about to see is recorded on normal difficulty. On the topic of doing things standardly, I will only be doing the main pathing through the bosses and none of the secret phases. I also need to emphasize the fact that because I'm a glutton for punishment and a general sadist, I strictly use the default starting gun across the entirety of the game. Yes, the pea shooter. Consequently, this made certain phases of certain bosses far more difficult than need be. But this only further solidifies the truth that I am that diehard. On a separate note, these early bottom echelon boss entries will be short and sweet due to their simplicity. But no worries, the more BS a boss is, the more I'll have to say about the matter. And trust me, it's gonna get real stinky in here. Now, I wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't demand tribute to the channel and request that you subscribe. These videos take a copious amount of time to create, and your support means the world to a growing boy like me. Alright, intro over. Now, let's analyze each boss's attacks, phases, and bullshit factors to determine who is the mightiest of them all. You just gotta love when a game has a grip on its difficulty scale, as the easiest boss is the very first one. The 3 phases of this boss fight features 3 separate bosses. The first shoots horizontal projectiles at you in bursts. Occasionally a pink worm will be sent your way, which you can then counter to build up your power meter. Hold down the trigger and keep gunning until the onion pops out. It will rain tears from the sky with the occasional pink tear to counter, but again, no real problem. Finally, the carrot arrives to shoot some totally psychedelic rays at you, with the occasional slow-moving carrot missile. A bit of movement and dodging is required here, but keep your fire focused on his face, and that's about it. For beginners, Goopy can be a tad challenging. That is until you realize that you can duck under his punching attacks in the first and second phases. This means that we simply need to jump over him as he makes his way to and fro. When going to the second phase, Goopy will pop some pills and juice up. In doing so, 3 question marks will appear around him, which we can parry to boost our meter. Jump, dash, duck, and shoot your way through the second phase to finally get a change up at phase 3. Mr. Legrand will slide around in his gravestone and attempt to flatten you. The consistency of his attacks makes this very easy to predict, especially with a well-timed dash, leaving you with nothing to worry about. It is at this point that I should mention that the only enhancement that we need is the smoke bomb, so please, as soon as you are able to, get the smoke bomb. Now, Sally is encountered much later in the game than what her difficulty warrants, and is one of the most forgettable bosses overall. I actually had to review the game footage to remind myself exactly what her phases and loadout were. The introduction primarily has Sally corkscrewing at you in a diagonal fashion. If you see her parasol engulf her, it means that she's about to dive bomb at your location, so time your dash accordingly. Sprinkle in some lingering fan projectiles and parryable kisses, ooh la la, and that essentially sums up Phase 1. Phase 2 changes scenes to Sally's house and the married life. Her children appear in the windows and throw bottles at you, but you can just shoot them until they cry, because these hands are rated E for everyone. Sally herself will largely keep the same moveset, save for the introduction of these arrogant wind-up toys that travel around and drop on your head. If anything hits you during this section, it will indeed be a wind-up toy. Smoke bomb often and keep the pressure up. Phase 3 changes scenes to depict the heavens and brings a new roster of attacks. The meteor that drops down can be destroyed to reveal a pink star that we can parry, which leaves the lightning and wave attacks. The wave is a simple jump dash, with the lightning requiring a bit of timing to maneuver through. All the while, Sally remains mostly stationary, allowing for an easy slapdown, which lands us into Phase 4. The boss will take their ovation while a parasol moves across the stage and the audience throws roses. These roses hurt, as does the parasol. Stay focused on dodging while shooting in her general direction. Your survival should be the priority over dishing out hits. Fortunately, this final phase does not have much health and should wrap up in no time. The lack of move diversity is the real reason that Sally ends up so low on the list, but we take those free wins where we can. End scene. Ribby and Croaks is likely to be the first real wall of the game for newbies. Things kick off with a fireball barrage done in the spirit of Might Guy's Asakujaku. Jump and duck accordingly and feel free to counter the pink ones if you're feeling daring. Fireflies will approach you from above, and it will be worth to dispose of them as soon as they spawn to save you a panic later. This phase is relatively short, and we should be moving on in about 3 cycles of fireballs and fireflies. Phase 2 sets a frog sandwich on either side, with you serving as the meat in the middle. Croaks will shapeshift into a fan and attempt to blow you back towards Ribby, while Ribby launches what appears to be planets? These planets ricochet off the floor and ceiling. These are fairly consistent projectiles, so it's simple enough to adjust your pacing as you gun down Croaks and dodge. After reaching the damage threshold, our froggy friends will perform the fusion dance and morph into a slot machine of all things. No further questions here. They kick things off with launching a few hard-to-see coins before dropping the slot arm down. Counter it to trigger the slot cycle. Alternating patterns of spiky laser platforms will come your way with increasing speed. Note that the boss can only be damaged during this attack. If RNGesus blesses you, you will get the straight floor pattern, which allows you to deal the most damage with the least risk. Bad RNG gives you the alternating laser platforms, which can easily lead to your demise. I was lucky enough in my playthrough to get double straight floors and blow the boss's backs out in a single attempt. Fun fact, the W in German is actually pronounced as a V, so allow me to introduce Werner Vermin. This face-off centers around Werner as he pilots a myriad of different vehicles. Starting off in his makeshift tank, things kick off with some cherry bombs that launch out a flame jet on either side after making contact. Be very mindful about this cheap-shotting splash damage. This attack is closely followed by the implementation of a catapult that fires a spread of 5 objects, with the gum available for your parrying pleasure. To round out the rotation, 2 springboards will be shot out that we can parry to gain some much needed height to jump and avoid Vermin's inevitable charge. However, you can just as easily opt for a jump plus smoke bomb to pass through unscathed. Phase 2 should happen in short order, with you needing to alternate between platforms to avoid being torched. Be mindful of the spinning bottle caps that slide out occasionally, and remember the ducking function. By paying attention to the bottle caps off screen, when they begin winding up, it signifies that that specific bottle cap is coming out to buzz you. Occasionally, the entire wall of them will spin up, prompting you to move to the other side of the arena altogether. Werner only takes damage when you shoot him directly and not just his vehicle. Completing this phase triggers the apparent end of our mouse friend as Tom chomps down and steps up to bat. The cat will slap one side of the area, causing boards to sprinkle down from above. He may also opt for spawning 2 ghostly mice that launch more firebombs. Shoot the mice to dispose of them, or you can stay your focus on the cat's face, as he does not have much health. The ease of which it is to do damage to the boss in conjunction with what feels like a small health pool locks this boss in the bottom echelon. Routing the cat will end the fight and reveal that Werner Vermin was actually piloting a kitty Gundam all along. What a twist! Captain Brinybeard joins Sally's stage play as another fairly forgettable boss. He's challenging initially, but much more doable when you remember you can duck. The captain is the last of the lower echelon bosses and has a very basic phase progression throughout the fight. Phase 1 through 3 blend together as the boss simply stacks more and more attacks as we progress, but I'll draw the line where appropriate. At the start, Brinybeard will pick up an octopus that shoots multiple projectiles in your general direction. At the same time, there will be a barrel dangling above that moves to your location and drops on you. Deal enough damage and we can start introducing some more seafaring animals. The first is the squid, which took notes from Mario Kart and darkens your screen with ink blots. However, shooting it will stop its shenanigans prematurely. The dogfish squad that slides out at you will be triggered via a periscope on the right side of the screen. And finally, the shark. You'll see the shark approaching in the background, which signals you need to move to the right side. And it is through all of this that you realize that this barrel has now become a problem, as it remains consistently throughout the fight and can be easy to lose track of amid all of the mess. Progressing forward, we see the boat itself joining the fray and periodically spitting out a cannonball, signaled by the chewing expression of the boat's face. Press the attack and we will reach the final phase, which is against the boat itself. Shoot at the exposed uvula to dish out the damage. The boat only has 2 attacks here that fire off in sequence. First, it will launch looping fireballs. This is quickly followed up by the classic Nappa Breaker Cannon. Since both of these attacks are dodged by ducking, this really means that the only threat you have to worry about is the barrel above. You are likely to die a few times here as you learn how to deal with all of the various attacks, but the simplicity of the fight layout and the stationary placement of the boss caps off our lower echelon. Throat punch and move on. Cagney Carnation has the best idle animation. Don't fight me on this one. The trick to fighting stationary bosses like this is to not pay attention to them. Focus on yourself and your immediate surroundings and trust that your bullets are hitting them. Bosses that do not remain stationary have that added difficulty aspect in that you need to pay attention to where you're shooting, in addition to dodging attacks yourself. Cagney kicks off with the funkiest of hand choreography as he glares at you menacingly. His seed gun appears to be his favorite attacks, as it spawns out these slow-moving, yet surprisingly tanky clam plants. Cagney also has these boomerangs and destructible carrot missiles that can be conjured from his hands. He will do his hand conjurations up to 3 times consecutively before going back to jazz hands, so expect there to be quite the number of flying projectiles during this time. The phase punch can cover either the top half or the bottom half of the screen, requiring you to relocate yourself appropriately, but it is the least threatening of his arsenal, in my humble opinion. Sustaining enough damage gets Mr. Carnation awfully upset as thorns twist and branch out, confining you to the platforms above. Our flowery friend will engulf 2 platforms at a time with his thorns and pop off buzzsaws. The initial shock and change up will likely KO new players, so consider this your warning. Stay on the middle platform as best as you can, as this platform will allow for the easiest transition to a safe landing. The little buzzsaws, which I think are dandelions, will cause your screen to get blurry if they hit you, but it's just the 2 attacks you need to worry about. And that's it! The boss only has 2 phases. If only certain other bosses were this way. Baroness von Bonbon is one of the select bosses that utilizes mini-bosses as actual phases for her fight. We have a choice selection of 3 from among 5 possible mini-bosses. We have Lord Gobpacker, who floats after you with a tiny gobstopper minion. Colonel Von Pop, whom floats about the arena in a horizontal figure 8 while summoning smaller minions. Mufsky Chernikov comes flipping out and landing with a splash of frosting that radiates from either side of him. Sergeant Gumbo Gumball scuttles out the gate and shoots a sporadic rain of gumballs. And finally we have Sir Woffington III, who flaps around the arena, finding a choice location to erupt into a 9-piece spread attack. After defeating the first mini-boss, a Jelly Bully minion will regularly be discharged from Whippet Cream Pup, aka Von Bonbon's castle, to charge at you. Keep this in mind as it is very easy to forget about and makes a nasty habit of sneaking up on you. Doing a quick subset ranking here from easiest to hardest, I would place Lord Gobpacker, then Sergeant Gumbo Gumball, followed by Mufsky Chernikov, Sir Woffington III, and finally Colonel Von Pop. For the best RNG, you're going to want to be dealt the first of these three for your ribbed pleasure. After dispatching of the Baroness's subjects, it's full steam ahead. The lady will mobilize Whippet Cream Pup and pursue you. Stay ahead and gun back while you can. Von Bonbon will throw her head at you, where it then homes in at your location in a stop-and-go fashion. But that's not all. A spinning pink mint will roll out to shake things up a bit. Alternate between the platform and the ground to keep the spinning head from zoning you. The spinning mint is parryable, which lends itself in building up your super to speed up this fight. I wish I had more helpful tips, but unfortunately trial and error will be the best teacher. It's just about learning each mini-boss's various attack patterns. And here come the aerial battles. There's only two attacks that Wally initiates, the most common one being a Yoshi egg toss that fragments against the screen, with each fragment ricocheting back. The second attack has Wally's head transfiguring into a hand that shoots 3 bullet bills in a spread. Of course, you can't have a good boss fight without some minions, and here we are treated to a lemming line of nail birds that make their way towards you. Dispose of them as you would and parry the pink bird for extra credit. You'll get the rhythm for this phase in just a few tries to where it then becomes a cakewalk. In short order, we'll reach the section that makes Mr. Warbles one of my favorite fights. After taking enough damage, he will sound the steam whistle and flap wildly, radiating bursts of feathers and introducing us to an all-out bullet hell sequence. Ignore everything and focus on your immediate area, making only minute adjustments to your position to narrowly avoid the missiles. Blowing Wally away will bring us to phase 2 against his son, Willy Warbles. Willy floats about the arena with 5 spiky eggs encircling him. This barrier of eggs constantly expands and contracts, with Willy popping shots hither and thither. This phase shouldn't be too much trouble, but possibly a bit tedious as you angle yourself in such a way to damage the boss. Now Wally's not going to let us slide on knocking around some baby birds, so he makes his final appearance to throw hands with you from the god stretcher. Wally will take out the trash and spit garbage at you, while occasionally kicking his own heart out to you to fire some bullets. When his heart comes out, he can only be damaged by attacking it directly. The 2 paramedic birds seem to have some beef with us as well, as they regularly shoot pills that fly out and split off into additional projectiles. Using your bombs are about the only way to do any damage here, so let them rip and lay waste to our featherless friend. And then it's off to seasoning in the cooker for him. Hildeberg solidifies the middle echelon pretty comfortably, and really starts the trend of bosses that require extensive practice to master and overcome. Hildeberg kicks off by weaponizing her laughter with the occasional jet plane taking pot shots at you. Less for concern is her tornado attack. Every so often, Hilda will inflate and then blast off in your general direction, so keep in mind you can go to tiny form to pull off the sick tricks of dodging. Things get spicy as Hildeberg goes into one of 3 possible transformations. First, we have the Cloud Bull. In this phase, it tries to gore us with a screen-wide horn attack. Next, we can get a Cloud Cupid that launches several missiles that home in on us. And finally, we have the one that I struggle against the most, which is the Gemini Witches. The Gemini Witches create this spinning red orb that fires rapidly in a circle. The problem is that the sphere spawned on my groin about 99.3% of the time. In my experience, I noted that Hildeberg usually picks only 2 out of the 3 to morph into per attempt. But after clearing this phase, we get to the dreaded Moon section. The crescent moon will shoot an assortment of stars at varying latitudes as UFOs come down the assembly line and project beams that split the screen. Avoiding these lasers is going to be the greatest challenge here, as their timing is offset. I don't have much in the ways of good advice here except to keep that shrink button handy. Dying here is especially painful because having to redo the earlier phases just feels like tedium. Hildeberg's secret boss feature here is the ability to tilt you into making rookie mistakes on repeat attempts, and I clearly remember her as being one of the first bosses I actually raged at. Dejimi is yet another aerial battle and provides a modest challenge, but the real secret to his difficulty, like Hildeberg, is the ability to tilt you. Dejimi opens up a chest where one of 3 wonders awaits. Good RNG will send us the cat sarcophagi, which move slowly and are relatively easy to destroy. Otherwise, we might see a spewage of jewelry or flying swords. The swords are annoying as they launch out and spin before launching a second time. The second phase sends us down a gauntlet, needing us to shoot the sections of pillar that have the genie's face while dodging buzzsaws. At the end of this small temple run is going to be the sarcophagus of Dejimi himself. Dejimi pops out as this comical red blob and pops off 2 nebulas that snake around while releasing his inner demons upon us. This is a relatively short phase that can be knocked out with a kamikaze attack. Simple enough, let's catch our breath before we battle our greatest enemy. Cuphead, as he's named, shows up and unleashes the rapid fire upon us while Jimmy's turban bobs around and unleashes a torrent of additional bullets. This phase is quite challenging and is where I died most of the time. Touching the Cuphead or the hat itself also causes damage, and having this kind of restricted airspace in a bullet hell phase makes doing this quite the chore to get through. But it wouldn't be enough if we ended things here, because now we face the Puppet Master himself. The genie's face will occupy the right side of the screen as 3 pyramids are summoned to launch out beams in a cross formation. We gotta get our dodge game on lock as rings are fired out of the turban as well to add yet another neat little obstacle for us to consider. Given how different each phase is, there's quite a lot to learn here. These last 2 phases are where you're going to be taking all of the damage, so making it to the Cuphead phase with 3 HP is all but required. Having 5 phases is definitely above the norm, but it is what it is, and there's quite the amount of material for us to learn and master here. This boss is difficult until you learn how the platform works. It may not be obvious at first, but you see these little pink blocks of soap? These drop onto either side of your cart and it will shift your position accordingly. You can always shift it back with a counter of your own, but to keep control, it will prove better to knock these things down before they reach you. Alright, now let's talk about the boss. The Phantom Express is cool in its design, but quite annoying. Introduction, eyeballs. Just eyeballs. Shoot them before they reach you and pay attention to the bars of soap that occasionally come out and drop on your head. Again, these bars will shift your cart position, so be mindful of that. This comes into play as Phase 2 brings out the skeletal conductor, who pops out of the carts and attempts to flatten you. The best strategy is to position yourself in the middle each time after he attacks, so you can parry to the area of safety as needed. Phase 3 is where we are likely to take some hits, as these 2 lollipops? Yeah, we're gonna go with that. These lollipops spring out like daisies and take turns blasting lightning. But seeing how the lightning traps you against one side of the screen, the bigger problem is going to be avoiding the projectiles that come with. Shooting the lollipops in the face is the way to deal damage here, and just as before, try to keep your cart positioned in the middle until it's time to dodge the lightning. And that brings us to the final phase, and to be quite honest, this final phase felt pretty unnecessary to me. But here we are, with a damn galloping train. Dying to this phase is painful, as the previous phases are quite the tedium as is. We need to counter the locomotive's tail to open up the latch and reveal its weak point. But when this happens, embers will fly out, giving us some danger flames to deal with. Gun the heart down until the door shuts, to where we then need to repeat the process again. Cala Maria is a stressful fight. There's little time for breaks, and I have a hard time pinning exactly which of her phases is the most difficult, as they are all challenging in their own right. But let's get started. Be ready to dodge, as Callie sounds off the boat horn and sends out 3 ghosts that lock on and quickly fly at your location. The trick is to wait for them to begin their charge, and then go mini and swiftly move up or down. Call it deja vu, but on top of that we have yet another selection of possible sea creatures that can be implemented. Of all of Cala Maria's aquatic friends, the seahorse is the least threatening, as its function is to disrupt your mobility by blasting you upward with a harmless stream of water. The second and moderately more problematic tortoise emerges from the right side of the screen and slowly drifts left while dispensing depth charges that explode into 8 projectiles. But the worst will be the pufferfish. Dozens of these things float upward in a tight formation across the playable battlefield. And while this isn't a problem on its own, it's the fact that Maria mixes in any of her other attacks in the restricted airspace. For the final summon, the boss lady will reach into the water and pull out either a red or yellow fish. The red fish spits out bursts of firefish. Ideally she goes for this one, as the yellow fish is much more of a headache. The yellow fish spits out an electrified dolphin that homes in on you. The combination of the yellow dolphin with the pufferfish is almost a guaranteed hit, so unfortunately, we gotta break out the prayer rug and wish for favorable odds. After enough gunfire, 2 eels pop out and shock Our Lady of the Sea, transforming her into a gorgon, and kicking off the second phase. A slew of eels will rise out of the ocean and continually fire off a 5 split of bullets. I cannot stress enough that you need to destroy these eels as fast as possible, as this can very easily become a bullet hell phase if they are left to their devices. Don't hesitate to shoot some missiles at the eels to cut them down with haste. But keeping these eels in check is much easier said than done, as Cala Maria didn't take on that appearance for nothing. Without much warning, she will blast a screen-wide wave that petrifies us, and can only be avoided by going up to this tiny corner or by not shooting or moving, essentially just setting your controller down. I attempted this quite a few times and I succeeded exactly 0 times in avoiding petrification. When you get petrified, spam the controls to break free of your stony prison, as those eel shots simply do not care. But you better get used to it, as this petrification attack continues into Phase 3. Calamaria's head will separate and we find ourselves entering a winding cave covered in what I can only assume to be coral, with spiky columns that spear out of nowhere. The snakes on her head shoot these floaty skull bubbles, and the stony gaze is all but unavoidable in this space. Hopefully you reach this section with some health to spare, because taking a hit here is basically inevitable. The best advice I can give is to always dart for areas of safety in preparation for getting petrified. As soon as you're stoned up, button mash free and continue the onslaught. King Dice wins the award for the most unique boss battle and finds himself so high on the list because he invokes the forbidden arts and plays the rule of endurance, #trademarked. We have seen this rule called before on this channel in the likes of Castle Crashers, Necromancer, and Ninja Gaiden 3's Kana the Goddess. King Dice lays out a board game of sorts that requires you to parry a die to move along said board, much like playing Candyland. If you play optimally, you will get 1 health up and 1 mini-boss fight at each segment, for a grand total of 3 health recoveries and 3 mini-boss fights. That's right, each of these red tiles contains a boss, and there's 9 tiles for the 9 possible mini-bosses that you can encounter. Just like with Baroness von Bonbon, I don't want to deviate too much from the main boss, so I'm going to quickly rank these mini-bosses here as a subsection of King Dice. Note that the following bosses are in the order that you would encounter them. Landing on tile 1 gets you the Tipsy Troop. 3 different alcoholic drinks spill their guts. One spills himself, covering the entire floor and requiring you to jump. Another, someone's flying olives to slap you around, and the final bottle splooshes on you from above. As you knock them out one by one, you will eliminate that specific drink's attack from the fight. A decent challenge when learning, but not so bad once you get the hang of it. Tile 2 is one of the easier ones. Chip's Bedigan throws sections of its body that you jump through. Do this several times while gunning, and that's it. Mr. Wheezy from Tile 3 is one of the most diverse of the minis. He has 2 patterns of whirling fireball attacks with a split of adds to float up the center. He will periodically change sides, thereby prompting you to also change sides lest you get hit. Pip and Dot. The Domino duo is much harder than they look. Their spike platformer is deceptively hard, which isn't made easier by their flying D20s and domino birds. Hoppus Pocus. This rabbit is one of the easiest of the bunch. The first of his attacks is these spinning rabbits that close in on you after a delay. Smoke Bomb when it collapses. His second and final attack is a storm of cards that can approach from above and below, requiring you to counter one of the pink cards to remain safe. Fear Lap. Fear Lap is a horse race bettor with only a single attack. A blue present will fly out his chest before erupting into a splash of horseshoes. While this is going on, a rope skeleton will occasionally fly off of one of the horses at the bottom of the screen to attack you. Paraletta is a golden dancing roulette table. By countering the floating poker chips, one can create platforms to jump over. Or you can be like me and simply smoke bomb it up. After dancing, Paraletta will spin and dispense roulette balls across the stage. Mr. Chimes is unique in that his boss fight is a card-matching minigame. Once you make a match, you are able to damage our clappy monkey friend for a time. Afterwards, he reverts to being mad, rapidly moving around the battlefield and clapping out projectiles. Keep matching and keep blasting. These bosses are all fairly close in difficulty, but the ones that are most likely to hit you are Pip and Dot, Mr. Chimes, and the Tipsy Troop. Every other boss is negligible, with the easiest 3 being Pyroletta, Chip's Bedigan, and Hoppus Pocus. Upon reaching the finish tile, the face-off against King Dice begins immediately. He has a single attack, comprised of him summoning cards that waltz across the screen in a tight-knit line. You will need to counter the pink cards as they arrive several times in succession. It is at this point of the game that I realized how truly bad I was at parrying. Side note, in cooperative mode, this section is a complete nightmare, as parrying anything in co-op freezes the screen for a fraction of a second and completely throws off the timing for your partner. If you've played co-op, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Fire off those supers as they come in and keep those parries a-comin'. Dying here resets you to the very beginning, demanding that you battle an entirely new slew of mini-bosses. And with that, I can easily say that King Dice is one of my least favorite bosses in the entire game, as he's not so innately challenging or complicated as he is just tedious as all hell. How do I put this kindly? This clown. I don't know how or why, but Beppy's jank-ass movements always hit me at the most random moments, and his taunting meat-eating grin gets under my skin. The spread shot is clearly the best weapon used against him, but using the default gun makes everything so painful. The intro was simple enough. Shoot down the overhanging ducks and avoid getting flattened by the cart. But I need to tell you, keep your distance. Beppy scoot boots irregularly and creeps forward more than you would expect, resulting in cheap shots. He will intermittently charge to the other side of the stage, requiring you to pull the switcheroo. But the next sequence is where we really start wishing we had that spread shot. Beppy will spawn dog balloons that bark their way to your cheeks, while a roller coaster of suicidal me's run you down. Be mindful of the nozzles that spawn the balloons, as it will often appear and face-sit you for yet another cheap-shotting attack. Beppy remains stationary in the center of the screen, but it gets difficult to focus on him, what with all of the dodging you need to do. It takes a good amount of practice and a good sprinkle of luck to make it past here uninjured. But phase 3 is where I failed most of my runs. Beppy gets a little too excited and bouncing on his horseshoe launching pony. These horseshoes can have quite the nuisance of patterns, and yes, the roller coaster me's will still be trying to flatten you. Getting reliable damage here is very difficult outside of standing directly under Beppy, but I wouldn't want to count on this as it is too easy to get hit by the roller coaster. The worst thing you can do is get jailed underneath the horse when the roller coaster comes a-chugging through. The final section is no joke either, as yes, the boss is very easy to hit, but there is a 90% chance that you'll be hit at least one time here. And let me tell you why. Step 1. Platforming. Step 2. Spawning an unholy amount of minions. Step 3. A mess of flying shit. Beppy reincarnates into a carousel of sorts while the roller coaster shifts into maximum overdrive. After the Mii's pass through at breakneck speed, these frog thingies come rolling out to take up residency on the bottom floor. They will quickly dispatch a slew of projectiles in the short time that it takes for the Mii's to make their rounds and run them over. I opted to use my super when these things spawn to not only maximize my damage against Beppy, but to also clear out the minions in the process. To beat this boss, I had to do a no damage run to this final phase and save up my super to shave off as much as I could. Not my proudest win, but it doesn't matter. A win's a win. We're moving on. I'm just going to keep it a stack here. I really don't like this boss. Any bout that requires you to platform while dodging projectiles, summons minions, and has the boss moving dynamically all the while is a load of bull honky, and Rumor Honeybottoms has it all. Phase 1 kicks off with Security Bee lazily floating around the arena and popping off these heinous bombs that explode in an 8-fold path-like projection. Not to mention we have some worker bees that float around trying to headbutt you. And yes, for the entirety of this fight, we got a platform up. The phase ends once you've damaged Security Bee enough. I opted for sticking to the left side of the arena and then quickly moving to right once things got too crowded. Staying in the middle just comes off as a bad idea in general. After we send security packing, the queen herself makes her appearance. Appearing on either side of the screen, Lady Honeybottoms will cast 2 spells at random. The first choice is going to be a tetrahedron that spawns randomly on the screen, usually sitting on your face. It then floats about while firing off spikes from each of the tips. The second choice is much more preferable, featuring a pink sphere that appears and slowly tracks you down. Yes, this can be parried, but the platforming aspect of the fight makes it safer to just dodge around instead. The final attack for this phase definitely takes some practice, but Rumor will appear at the top of the screen and drop her head down the middle. She then shoots a number of B missiles on either side that trace this sort of S shape. Take your time in studying the pattern and ignore all other distractions. This phase is highly likely to shave off a few of the old health pool, especially when the spells spawn on top of you with nothing to do about. But of course, that wouldn't be an upper echelon boss fight if it didn't feature a painful final phase that has a high probability of ending you and forcing you to do the tedious introductory phases all over again. This is where patience is pushed. Rumor will sift through the book and locate a new spell that transforms her into a fighter jet, taking to the bottom of the screen. She'll fire off these punching missiles that have janky pathing while revving up and buzzsawing either side of the arena. And this is where we start hitting those game over screens, as we need to watch our character, the platforms, the attack cues from Rumor, the unpredictable pathing of these fist missiles, while shooting the boss in the face at a downward angle all at the same time. It doesn't help much that given my loadout and the boss's position, that my super is all but useless in this section. It is much better used in mini form with the missiles. I hope you got a good night's rest before this fight, because it requires your brain to be firing on all cylinders just to keep up with all that's going on. And talk about firing on all cylinders, Dr. Call and Rumor Honeybottom were neck and neck and essentially tied for the spot on the list. But in light of the fact that many of these bosses are made more difficult by me running on the default weapons, I believe having things such as the homing and lobber could serve to make life more manageable for Rumour. However, I have to give it to Dr. Call's robot because no matter what your loadout is, we're in airplane mode, where your weaponry doesn't matter. The raw opening face-off goes raw, in your face. This is probably the hardest Phase 1 out of any of the bosses on this entire list. There is a mind-boggling 8 different attacks that can come out the gate. The antenna on the robot's head tracks you and fires a persisting laser. The core of the robot launches out a charge and expands lasers across the screen in a vertical fashion. And the stomach shoots out little spaceships that snake about the arena in an S-shaped pattern. But Codiferrous, that's only 3 attacks. Yeah? Well, we need to destroy each of the robot's parts to proceed through the stage, and for each piece we destroy, we unleash a new attack. In my many deaths during this phase, I found the best route to take is to destroy the stomach first, then the heart, and then the antenna. Destroying the stomach ceases the assault of the spaceships and instead gives us these neat homing missiles that increase in acceleration before their inevitable, unreasonable, large explosion, which of course lingers around to jail our movement. Destroying the core stops the laser charges, but gives the automaton access to his arms for 2 separate attacks. Using his twisty twisters, the arms will split the center of the screen from the left, confining us to the bottom or top of the screen respectively. Needless to say, getting jailed here can be a problem depending which of the other attacks are currently in the mix. The second attack will be a magnet probe that rises up to draw you in and limit your movement. You can overcome its pull via going mini. And then there's destroying the head. Disabling the laser shifts the robot's head into a cannon that continually disperses a spread of gears, and it is for this reason that you best save the antenna for last. If you play things smart, you can whittle down each section of the robot to make way for a quick knockdown as to minimize the amount of time you need to deal with this level 2 weaponry. In any case, once all 3 sections have been dealt with, the automaton's heart will be exposed. Lay waste to it to proceed to the second phase. That's right, all of that for Phase 1. The good news is that the second phase is a breather. The head floats back and forth across the screen with constant appearances from the Phase 1 homing explosives. Given the amount of room we have to roam across the screen, you'll find these considerably easier to deal with. Take your time here and steel yourself for the final phase. Dr. Call finally shows himself while piloting the automaton's head. Very reminiscent of Baby Bowser, if I'm being honest. The robot's mouth will open to reveal a diamond that blasts projectiles in every which direction. These electrified walls will come swinging in from the top and bottom. The same advice that I've given before, focus on your own position and survival. Dying here means repeating Phase 1, and we do not want to go back there. The boss takes damage from being shot directly or by hitting the robot, so you don't need to be too focused on where you're aiming. Your missiles do fly straight through the electric walls, so keep that in mind. Best of luck out there. Being a game with a decent grasp of difficulty scaling, the Devil himself takes up the penultimate spot. As the final boss, the Devil's got only the most obnoxious of attacks complemented by the most tedious of phases. The introduction pits you against him as he fires off from his throne, much like Armored Xemnas from Kingdom Hearts 2. There's quite the numeration of attacks in Phase 1. We have the Head Smash, Hand Clap, the Winding Dragon, and a 2-flavor take on the moving projectiles. The hand clap is avoided by jump dashing at the proper time, and the Winding Dragon is mitigated by running to the far end of the screen. However, the thing most likely to damage you is also the most infuriating aspect about this, and it's these never-ending demon f***s that run at you from either side of the stage. Getting through Phase 1 without taking damage will require quite the amount of practice, but practice you must as you will need all the health you can get for the rest of the fight. This next phase is signaled by the Devil casually unzipping his skin and jumping into a hole. Follow him promptly to begin, what's that? Platforming! The target here is the Devil's eyeballs. The Devil will dispense projectiles occasionally, but if you see a pink flappy bomb, you need to parry this as soon as possible, else it explodes in a massive radius. Phase 3 cranks it up as we are introduced to these flying jackholes that play horseshoes in tandem with small flying enemies that appear at the top of the screen and converge at your location. This is the most dangerous part of the fight because there's just so much going on at once. You need to deal with all of these new threats while keeping a bead on the Devil's eyes and platforming simultaneously. It is all too easy to get your wig split here. You need to ignore the Devil as much as you can and home in on disposing of the threats. Knock out the minions as fast as possible, Then shoot in the devil's general direction while hoping the shots hit and maintain your platforming. Your self-preservation should be the priority over dealing damage to the boss. You'll feel relief when you make it through this, but the grand finale requires your focus still. We are reduced to a single platform and need to dodge the falling chandelier as well as the devil's own tears. When the chandelier falls, jump out to the side and back in. You'll need to do this several times while popping off that good DPS to find your final success. Congratulations and welcome to the club. Beating this boss means that you have completed one of the most difficult and skill-driven games around. Wear your crown high, my protagonists. I'm proud of you. I might be proud of you for beating the devil, but my pride brims if you've made it this far. The #1 pick for the Cuphead main story boss ranking goes to Grim Matchstick. As a constant reminder of the momentous victory that was achieved the day I initially beat him, Grim Matchstick has actually been the lock screen of my phone since I very first played the game 6 years ago. This dragon not only has one of the best introductory animations, up there with Cagney Carnation of course, but 2 of his faces are the most grueling ones across all other boss phases in the game. He has every flavor of irritation that culminates in him being the Neapolitan ice cream of bull. Grim opens up with some fiddly-widdly fingering before commencing his opening move. A burst of waves from his eye sockets. Expect the last of these projectiles to be pink to grab a free counter. Initially these come out in a wave of 3, but as he takes damage they come out in bursts of 4. In between this, Grim pulls out a joint approach and laying out twisting fireballs and thunder from down under tailpikes. And this boss wouldn't be #1 if he didn't have the platforming aspect, am I right? Because all the while that this is going on, you need to constantly be platforming on the clouds at every phase of the way, which brings us to phase 2. Grim will switch to the other side of the screen and release a parade of sentient fireballs that cannonball toward you in a lobbing arc. The AI for these things need to be studied, because holy hell, their prediction is insane. They seem to know which platform you're going to jump to, and at what exact time you're going to make the move towards the platform. The only hint I can share is that the direction that the fireballs face before they jump is the direction that they are going to jump. But this is such a brief window to observe, process, and then execute the proper countermeasure that it's almost not worth paying attention to. Yes, the second phase is made leaps and bounds easier by employing the lobber gun, but that would violate our challenge of using only the default gun. So we stick it out and fire off as best as we can until we clean out phase 2. As we prepare for phase 3, I pray that by this point you have only taken a single point of damage at most, because this third phase, it is pain incarnate. Grim splits one head into 3 and the map begins a stormin'. The rain makes this fight more difficult as it helps in obscuring your bullets as well as Grim's own attacks and animations. This is an opinion that I'm going to stand and die on. The boss's loadout changes to just 2 attacks. The first is a flamethrower that covers the center of the stage. You'll note this is coming when you see one of the dragon's heads transmute into a fire hose, followed by a deep breath audio cue. To avoid this, I stuck to the top of the screen and platformed high. Note that you may have to jump and dash to make it to your next available platform, and avoid singeing your scrot. But of course, I saved the most debilitating attack for last. Matchstick's primary attack for phase 3, and the one that will haunt your very dreams, is these nasty flame orbs that are fired off in a sporadic fashion. You need to be exceedingly careful not to shoot these, as these projectiles will split into 4 more fireballs that launch out in a diabolical cross formation. Death here is all but inevitable. In a natural Cuphead fashion, dying at this final phase can easily send you in a spiraling tilt that finds you making mistakes on the easiest of splits on your repeat attempts, which only adds to the fire that is burning away at your sanity. Best of luck. And that's going to do it for this list. The Harmless Henchman Award for the least threatening boss goes to the Root Pack. Out of all the bosses, I really believe that this is the one that you are most likely to beat on your first try. The Lethal Adversary Award for the most deadly encounter goes to Grim Matchstick. At the time of doing this video, I am confident I can replay the game right now and beat all the bosses again with repeatability. Grim Matchstick is the one, however, where I'm hanging on to a prayer to overcome. Thank you all so much for your time and support, and as always, I really do appreciate it. Take care, stay safe, stay healthy, and I'll see you soon for the next one. Bye-bye.